All right, greetings and welcome to another episode of the Unnamed Bracketology podcast. My name is Kerry Miller, joined again, as I have been for the last 4 days, by Graham Dorn. We're mostly going to be doing a post-mortem on the mock committee that we've been participating in. Graham, how are you doing? How's your voice holding up after all that conversation?
I'm doing well. I'm ready to not be speaking so much. Did a lot of listening too.
Uh, I love those guys, but I'm glad that we'll only be texting over the next few days. I need a break from all the arguing and trying to jump in over everybody and whatnot, but I got to take my shot. It is March, baby. Oh, that was the closest one yet. Although my head was probably blocking it anyway. But went for the bank. It was not open. So we wanted to discuss pretty much the biggest takeaways we had from the mock. Teams that were maybe in different spots than we thought they were going to be. Teams who we changed our minds on. And before we jumped on the call, you said you wanted to bring up Clemson. That's also a team I thought was worth discussing. Why don't you take the floor on them?
Well, I think Clemson has been so good when you look at their quad splits against both quad one and quad two. Terrific overall record and a great overall record in the ACC, just two ACC losses. And then you add on top, they beat Duke, historically great team. They beat Kentucky. I think you're talking about a five-loss Clemson team. They have to be in consideration for the top of the bracket into that 4 or 5 spot. And I think for a lot of the committee, they just could not fathom the idea that Clemson, without a major win away from Little John Coliseum, could be in a top 4 seed. And so I think that was a really big learning opportunity for me, because it's not that I wasn't aware of the deficiency in Clemson's profile. It just makes me think, hey, if guys on our committee are thinking this, there's probably some committee members that this is a no-go for them. They do not want to vote a team like that there. And because none of us really care about who we're talking about, right? Like, we don't have a personal fan bias there. Like, we just want to get it right. That's all we really care about. So if these guys are hung up on the idea that Clemson doesn't have a big win away from home, surely some committee members are thinking the same thing.
Yeah, I think I don't remember who it was that like first on bracketology Twitter was saying that Clemson's looking like a strong 5 seed, moving up to a 4 seed, and they just like ever since the win over Duke, they've just been creeping up and up and up, and there's been no reason to knock them. It was almost kind of an AP poll logic with them. And until we really dug into them, like I had them near the top of my four line. And now after all the discussion we had on Clemson, I'm like, wow, yeah, they really haven't done shit away from home. I mean, it's 5 losses. You kept bringing that up, and yeah, that's a great point. I kept bringing that up with Memphis and didn't get me very far. But but yeah, to have 5 losses, to be 18-2 in the ACC, even in a garbage ACC. I mean, they beat Duke. What more can you expect from an ACC schedule? I think they got a home win over North Carolina as well. I'm not actually looking at their resume at the moment, but goodness knows I should have it memorized over the last 4 days. But yeah, I think they are now, a middle back end of the 5 seed line for me. I mean, that might change if they beat Louisville in the ACC semis. They might drop into that 7, 8 seed range if they were to lose early in the ACC tournament. I don't know, because that is such a boy. We spent a lot of time just trying to figure out who should be number 29. That's where that cutoff is like crazy right now. Was there anyone in particular that was everybody was higher on than you thought? There's definitely one for me, but I'll let you go first.
I think it was Missouri for me after the past couple of weeks they've had. Because as we were going through the scrubbing process, I had Missouri as my top 8 seed, and people did not seem to want to get them off the 6 line. I thought we'd at least be wanting to get them onto the 7 line. And for me, what really stands out is the only 3 wins away from Columbia. I think that is a major negative on their resume. Same thing, and it's funny because it's the same group that was like, hey, they haven't done anything away from Little John. We can't have Clemson that high. And then with Missouri, 3 wins away from Columbia, and they're like, no, that's okay. We like what they've done.
Well, to that point, it is interesting how the dynamic of the conversation changes as you work your way down the bracket. Obviously, when we were comparing We had a lot of Kentucky, St. John's, Texas Tech talk for that last two seed, and then it was, oh, well, they got a lot of great wins in terms of Kentucky. People weren't worried about they have 10 losses. I think 10 losses is a lot for a two seed. We've never seen, assuming they don't win the SEC tournament. I'm not saying they can't, but if they don't, they will have 11 losses. I went back down to like 1996, and I've never seen an 11 loss or more, one seed or two seed. So I think that's a holdup for Kentucky, but it didn't bother some people. St. John's being a four-loss Big East champion, I didn't think the committee was as respecting of that as I thought we would be. I agree at this point after Alabama's win over Auburn, there's no case for St. John's to play its way up to a one, but I was surprised that we didn't even have them as our top three in the end, did we? I think Texas Tech was ahead of St. John's. So yeah, that was a little weird to me. But then, like you said, we get down and you're just the arguments change as you work your way down the seed list, and like, that's just the way it is. We do that internally as well. Like you're just looking for different reasons to ding teams. The one for me that we were way higher on than I expected was Oregon, which was the same thing. I had them as my top eight. They were 29 for me a week ago. Boy, we were talking about them for 15. Like we were three and a half seed lines higher than I am on the Ducks. And I think I've adjusted. I now accept that they might be a back end four. I still think they're probably a five at best, but man, that whole Big Ten bunch. I mean, Michigan State very solidly a two at this point, but we could end up with four Big Ten teams on the four line and then two more on the five line.
Yeah, I think there's a big pile of Big Ten teams on the 4 and the 5 line, which I think is interesting because we've not seen a 4 and a 5 seed from the same conference play in the second round. It's probably going to happen this year, and it's probably going to be the Big Ten that does it because you've got Purdue there, you've got Wisconsin, you've got Oregon, maybe even Michigan hanging on to a 5 seed. I think they could potentially drop to a 6. Just a lot of different options. Maryland, of course, is there. A lot of different options from the Big Ten to be in that range. So it's probably going to happen. I think one of the things that we talked about a little bit, you and I offline, is just kind of the Big Ten in general. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a Big Ten team who's a little bit further down the bracket than we think. For example, I think people say, well, Michigan. I mean, look at them. They had such a great Big Ten record. And I'm like, well, they lost on neutral court to Oklahoma. They lost on neutral court to Wake Forest. They lost on neutral court to Arkansas. They had a negative point differential in the Big Ten. In their 5 toughest Big Ten games, they were blown out in basically 4 of them. In one game, they did win. Like, very impressive resume overall. But would you be surprised if Michigan was a 7 seed? I wouldn't be. Like, I think you really start to break that team down, we might see a little Big Ten fatigue once we start to get to the middle of the bracket. And they might wonder, should this all be like 4 and 5s here, or should one of you get bumped down a little bit further than people think?
Yeah, I feel like are we going to hit Big Ten fatigue or are we going to hit SEC fatigue first? Because I brought that up with Mississippi State that we have them down to a 9 seed. I think I may have ended up there as well on my seed list. You mentioned Missouri. Tough call on them. Ole Miss is now a tough one as well, probably in that 5, 6 seed range. But yeah, I presently have 7 Big Ten teams between 13 and 22 on my overall seed list. So like I was looking at, I think I still have Michigan as my last 5, and I don't like it, but I was like, well, if I drop them, what am I going to do? Bring up Illinois? Like that doesn't help me. Bring up UCLA? That doesn't help my, the 4 or 5 Big Ten dilemma. Can't bring up BYU because they're not even allowed to play in that pod probably. So yeah, it's going to be messy in the middle of the bracket for sure. Anybody else that jumped out at you?
I think Louisville has a lot of differing opinions. I think for some of the committee members could not get past the fact that they, in their top games, have not really been competitive, including Ole Miss at home. And then for other committee members, it seemed like they were more willing to say, well, you guys like Clemson at 18-2. Why not like Louisville at 18-2 with a win over Clemson? I kind of get that logic. At the same time, it's just funny how sometimes we'll get fixated on certain things and it's just like a line in the sand that you don't want to move past. And I think that's where how the real committee operates. You'll have some people who do not want to see a team in a certain area and others who want to move that team up. And it's not that either of them are wrong. It's just a personal opinion difference.
I think I was the primary one pushing the 18-2 thing, and it was less of a I think Louisville should be a 5 or a 6 seed than a I don't think there should be a 4 seed line gap between Clemson and Louisville. Like either you respect the 5 losses and the 18-2 of Clemson, and that's why they get a 4 seed, or you don't, and you put them down with Louisville. That again, it's just the argument changes based on which teams you're really comparing.
When we were going through scrubbing, I thought the same thing about Arizona and Kansas. Is Arizona and Kansas are both 11-11 against quads 1 and 2. They both have 4 wins against quad 1A. And as we were scrubbing, I thought we were going to drop Arizona down a little bit. People were happy with keep them a 4 seed, keep Kansas a 7 seed, and I just thought that was a bit of a big gap for the resumes.
Don't say people were happy. I was not happy. I was even saying that when we were doing the bracketing at the end, we were like, because at the time we still had Arizona. Well, I guess we did end up with Arizona, I think, at 15 overall. So they were a 4 seed, which meant we had 4 Big Ten teams. So it was the Michigan State, whichever region they were 2 in, and then the other 3 Big Ten teams all had to go in the other regions. It got like all sorts of messy. And I was like, if we had just seeded Arizona properly, we wouldn't have this problem right now. Because the Big 12 was also a problem with 4 teams up there. It got really messy. But yeah,
I think
I agree there should not be a 3 seed line gap between Arizona and Kansas by any stretch of the imagination.
I think another team that surprised me was Marquette. A lot of committee members seemed adamant that they should not be dropping down further. And frankly, I thought we had them a little high as a group at the bracket reveal, and I still think we have them too high. And I think it's been messing with some of our other teams because people just do not seem to want to drop Marquette for whatever reason.
Yeah, I still have Marquette as my bottom 7. I think that's where we ended up in the mock. But they could be lower than that for sure, especially if, you know, 2 of the teams very close behind them, Connecticut and Creighton, right? Sometimes you just get to a point where you're comparing conference teams head to head, like you're trying to do, Arizona and Kansas, as I was saying, Clemson and Louisville. And that's what makes Memphis and St. Mary's and Gonzaga the ultimate wild cards, right? You eventually get to some sort of conference hierarchy where you're usually not going to be 3 seed lines off on a team because you already have a different team in that conference to compare them to. Whereas, boy, Memphis, some people want them. I think they should be at worst a 6 seed. Some people have them as an 8 seed. Some people being you, Graham Dorn, or do you have them as a 7 now?
I have them as a 7. I have Missouri as an 8, but I will say I think Missouri may benefit from Memphis picking up a third loss against Quad 3. 2, I think, is kind of acceptable. Once you get into that 3 range, it reminds me a lot of FAU, where it's like, hey, just throw them on the 8 line. We know they're a good team. We know they've done a lot of good stuff, but getting on a 7 line with 3 losses against Quad 3 is a lot.
Don't act like they just added a quad 3 loss. It was a quad 2 that turned into a
Well,
quad
I
3.
think, I think this is a good point though about the mock is a lot of people are just like, well, they only had 2 losses against quad 3. It's like in the mock, we look at those 2B losses, Wichita State, that was a bad loss for us, right? That was when you get down and you really discuss these teams, it's not just about what quad they are in, it's about how good or how bad that loss really is.
Yeah, for sure. I was surprised at how much time we spent saying, where were they in the reveal? 24 hours after the reveal, I didn't spend a second thinking about it until we started that mock, and then we were all talking about like, oh, where was Purdue? Where was Texas A&M? Like, would they move that much? And I feel like that would be a thing if this was the first year with the reveal, or if something particularly shocking had happened with the reveal. We all came away from the reveal feeling like, outside of maybe Wisconsin being a bit too high, we're like, yeah, that pretty much backed up what we thought it would be. Good job by the committee. And now we're like subtracting from our own thoughts and just focusing on the reveal. I thought that was strange.
Yeah, I thought that was strange as well, and I also thought it was not really thinking very well about the circumstances at the time. Before with the bracket reveal, Kerry, we talked a lot about how seed lines or the overall seeds 11 to 15 were all tightly bunched. And if we had them in the complete opposite order, So what? Because they're so close to each other. Like no harm, no foul if you get those wrong. And then all of a sudden, during our conversation for the mock, people are like, Wisconsin was 11th. I mean, clearly they had that respect from the committee. I'm like, the committee had to put somebody 11th. They had to
Yeah.
put somebody 15th. We all knew that. Let's not make it a bigger deal than it really was.
Yeah. I remember that. We were at the time of the reveal, we were very solid on the top 10, just like across the board. And then, yeah, the last two, three seeds, it was like, I guess Wisconsin, Arizona, sure. And then, yeah, that's part of why Arizona still ended up as a four. I know we brought up that they were still 12 overall, but right when the Oklahoma year, they went from a four seed to a 10 seed. And we all have the past reveal data, right? Nobody has become a one or a two seed without having already been in the mock or in the top 16 in the reveal. Michigan State is going to change that this year. And there was one year Villanova dropped from number 6 overall in the reveal to number 18 in the final bracket. I believe that was 2021, which if it was a weird year where some teams had more data than others and probably not much to take away from that anyway. But yeah, I don't know. I don't care what they did at the reveal. Purdue has lost 5 games since the reveal, so why should we reward them for being whatever they were, sixth or seventh at the time?
Well, another weird thing about it is I think a lot of people in the mock would talk about, well, here's what their record is since. And I'm like, here's what I mean. We're bracketologists. We know overall record isn't the end all be all, right? Like you guys just said Clemson only having 5 losses isn't a big deal to you. And now all of a sudden you're over here talking about here's what their record is. So, like, let's look at the meaning behind those games. So I just felt like oftentimes not only did we look back at the bracket reveal too much, we extrapolated from it in a way that didn't really make a lot of sense.
How about we've mostly fixated on the 4 through 8 seeds, which is what we knew was going to be the fixation all week long. But what about down on the bubble? I was surprised at, especially with Rocco being in the group, how low we were collectively on Drake and UC San Diego. Like I think we ended up with UC San Diego at where were they? 45. So like just barely ahead of the last two at larges. Like I think UC San Diego is probably a 10 seed. I think Drake could be in the mix for a 9 seed with 3 losses, a couple of quality wins, and we were barely getting them in. I was shocked. I must have had Drake number one on 8 different voting ballots, and they just kept getting passed by.
Yeah, I was a little surprised by that too because I feel very strongly that Drake is going to be a 10 seed. I don't think they have quite enough to get up to the 9 line, but when you put together the sort of resume they have, 3 overall losses, what are they now 6-0 against quads 1 and 2 after
Yeah.
they're after beating Bradley? You're telling me a team that's 6-0 against quads 1 and 2 with 3 losses on the season isn't going to get above the 11 line? I don't care what their efficiency metrics are. You have to reward the resume at some point, and I think Drake is going to be on that 10 line, so I was surprised that we didn't have them higher.
Yeah, I have Drake as my top 10. I'd like to scrub them up a little bit higher, but I definitely have them 2 spots ahead of Vanderbilt. Nice little head to head to back that one up there.
Yeah, I was
Um,
surprised we had Vandy so high above Drake. I really didn't get that one.
yeah, you made that point that we should just swap Georgia and Vanderbilt, and I was like, yeah, I agree with that. And then Tim was like, now hold on, and I respect it. We want to do the scrubbing properly. I think we got to a point where we were trying to rush things a little bit, but yeah, I did that. I swapped Georgia and Vanderbilt. I now have Georgia at 36 and Vanderbilt at 39. And I do think Vanderbilt is solidly in. I think they would need to lose, and a lot of things would need to happen around them to fall out at this point. What about Ohio State making the cut? And I know that was going to be a debate. I think heading into the last day, like it was pretty much Ohio State or UC Irvine at that point. And again, with Rocco in the committee and all the time we spent talking about Irvine, I'm surprised we didn't get that across the finish line.
Yeah, I was surprised. I had UC Irvine in my last bracket, and I just think Ohio State at this point has a bit of an unselectable resume. That doesn't mean that the committee couldn't do it, but it's just a gross, ugly overall record given their chances. And they can back it up with metrics too. Like Rocco talked about metrics, that's kind of like your back up your work, make sure you're not missing anything. we see what we see with the Ohio State resume, and then you look at their resume metrics, and it's like, oh yeah, all the resume metrics don't think they should be in the tournament either. So I was surprised that we have so many different options for teams from non-power leagues that have done some good stuff, and we opted for a 17 and 14 team whose resume metrics aren't tournament worthy.
I wouldn't say they're not tournament worthy, right? They're above the Rutgers threshold, the Mendoza line, whatever you, the Peichel line, whatever it is. But yeah, they're like around 50th average resume average. And I'm okay. We've seen 15 lost teams get in before, but those teams did something special. And outside of that 20-point win over Kentucky that we have for months been saying was just the weirdest result of the season, and I think I made this joke during the mock, like Ohio State as well as Michigan have pretty much just existed to hand out quality wins to other teams pretty much since then. Like they have three pretty high quality wins, but not five or six like those Alabama and Vanderbilt teams of yesteryear did when they were able to get a 9 seed with 15 losses. And I think to that point, I think those teams got in with 15 losses because they were so solidly in as a 9. If it had been right on the cut line, they might have gotten scrubbed out just because of the volume of losses.
I think Ohio State probably needs to win 2 games in the Big Ten tournament to be in. So I was surprised we already had them in. Because if you already have them in, you probably think they can go 1-1 in the Big Ten tournament. So I was just a little bit surprised on where we had Ohio State. It also made me wonder about some of these teams that maybe look like they should be in danger of missing the field, but teams like San Diego State, like if we're getting down to this bubble, I think they can probably lose to Boise State and be in. Like it just seems like there's a big gap between 6 spots in and 6 spots out.
Yeah, even Baylor, who I've now scrubbed down to an 11 seed, like I feel like they need to. I mean, they're not even going to be able to take an embarrassing loss, right? I think they play probably Kansas State or
Well,
Arizona
everybody's the
State.
top 100 team in the Big 12, so you're
Yeah,
not really going to have that opportunity.
yeah. So their resume is not necessarily going to get worse. I don't know that they can fall behind a North Carolina or even a UC Irvine. Although if it's Baylor versus UC San Diego because UCI wins that, that's a different story. I think maybe Baylor is behind the Tritons there, but yeah, even them, even Baylor at like 43, 44 overall, it's like, can they really fall out unless there's a bunch of bid thieves? Because there's just nothing palatable on the outside looking in. Like Dayton's in, what was it? Matt Browning has Dayton in, like, and you and me were both arguing like we need to at least talk about Dayton, and Tim wanted to talk about procedures, and they wouldn't have that conversation. I was trying to look up like in the procedures what they would do because I know there's something where if at least three committee members agree on it, like they can revisit a different team. You can nominate basically anything. Like they're not going to keep a team out just because they didn't look good on Thursday and then they pick up a great win on Friday, but that and Dayton's not in great shape by any means. That's just where we were at, scratching the bottom of the barrel.
Yeah, I think speaking of scratching bottom of the barrel, I think Utah State and San Diego State are probably in good shape from the Mountain West. Boise State would have been if they beat Colorado State, but Colorado State is my second team out of the tournament right now. And I think they have a better chance than a lot of people are giving them credit for. Not only have they looked great in the Mountain West season, but if you compare them to some of those other top Mountain West teams, those are comparably good head-to-head results and common opponent results. So I think if Colorado State can get to the Mountain West tournament final, I wouldn't be surprised if the Rams, despite resume metrics that don't look like they should be in, I wouldn't be surprised if they end up getting into the tournament.
So they're your second team out. I'm going to guess, even though we've just said we want nothing to do with Ohio State, that's probably your first team out, just
That is
because
my
what
first
else are you
team
going
out.
to do?
Yep.
Yeah. So I think I go Ohio State. Who's next? Dayton, I guess. Then North Carolina, Boise State, and Colorado State. And I don't want any part of any of them. But I think that if Xavier loses to Marquette, now you got to kick the Musketeers out possibly, and it's going to be a mess. Usually, as much as we complain every year about the bubble being bad, usually at this time it's like, oh, there are like 9 teams that I could see playing their way in. Now I don't see that at all.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I have Ohio State, Colorado State, then UNC, and then Dayton. And I keep coming back to if Dayton didn't lose by 2 against UNC and just barely pulled that one out, I think Dayton's probably in the tournament. In hindsight, not getting past UNC, if both of those two teams are towards the cut line, I think UNC, without a win over Duke, the committee will probably leave them out. And then they'll look at Dayton and say, we should probably have UNC one spot above Dayton.
Yeah, so you're right. I do have UNC second out, Dayton third out, and I've made that exact thought in my head. I was like, oh, 2 point neutral site loss. They're neck and neck. Might as well. Anybody else? Anything else that jumped out at you about the mock in general this year?
I thought it was interesting that we kind of decided to focus not so much on the metrics, which I completely think that's. Here's what I'll say. I've always viewed it as metrics give you a good idea of where in the bracket a team should be placed. And then your resume helps you figure out where to actually place them. So it's kind of interesting having this discussion about like metrics as a last resort because I kind of go the opposite way and say, yeah, metrics help me sort where teams should be, and then I'll figure out where exactly they should go.
Yeah, that's the first thing I do. I pull all my data together. I average all 6 metrics, sort them that way. And I don't put that as the seeds, but that's like the starting points. Like, okay, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4. And yeah, you got to start somewhere. You can't just like dive in with pencil and paper and be like, okay, I think this is the best team. And then I remember this team's really good. Like you're working off of a spreadsheet. You can't just ignore the numbers. So I agree. You and I are definitely more metrically focused than some of the other committee members, and that's probably true of the actual committee. Who knows? I mean, there's probably a lot of shirts and skins debate, and who knows?
Yep.
All right, that's enough. I'm fed up with talking from the last 4 days. We'll figure out a sometime during the championship week chaos to get another one of these in. Probably Thursday, midday, afternoon. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We'll be back, and then we'll definitely do something on Selection Sunday as well, and then hopefully we'll be 100% correct, like we never are. Until next time, take care.